Welcome to the Loud Noise Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Walsh. Loud Noise is where I dig into conversations with some of my favorite musicians. Our goal is to share experiences and ideas that you can use in your own creative development. From breakthroughs and challenges to successes and lessons learned, you'll have a front row seat to the best show in town. I'm a guitar player, writer-producer, living in Prague, Czech Republic, via Nashville, via New York City. I've spent my life living the dream and making music. I've had a lot of help along the way, and this is a chance for me to share some of what I've learned with you. So let's crank it up and join me in welcoming today's guest for some loud noise. Ken Rich is a producer, engineer, composer, and musician. An accomplished bassist, he performed and recorded as a session musician in New York City, working with Laurie Anderson, David Byrne, and Babatunde Ulantuni, among others. Gradually, he shifted his focus to producing and engineering with a series of home studios and created Grand Street Recording in 2004. In 2008, Ken's score and sound design for Alex Lee Roth's play, The Common Air, won the 2008 LA Drama Critics Circle Award for sound design. Producing and engineering credits include Joseph Arthur, Tracy Bonham, Angus and Julia Stone, Sophie B. Hawkins, David Mead, Renee Lopez, Amanda Brown, Ingrid Michelson, Mike Doughty, Big Yuki, Bill Sims Jr., Morley, Julia Darling, and Lucinda Bear Black. You can find out more about Ken and his studio at www.grandstreetrecording.com. In our conversation, we get into Ken's time at Oberlin University studying philosophy and religion and how that helps him today as a producer. The transition from New York City session bass player to Grammy-nominated engineer, producer, and business owner, and practical tips to consider when going into the recording studio. On a sad note, we recently lost a New York City treasure. Bill Sims Jr. was a mentor to me and to so many of New York City's finest musicians. He was a blues man of the highest order and has been mentioned here a few times already on the Loud Noise podcast. In our conversation, Ken shares a personal story about Bill that demonstrates the quality of his character. We recorded this interview before Bill's passing, but we felt we should leave it in the final version as a small tribute to this great man. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Ken Rich. Do you remember the first time you actually noticed music?
Yeah, I mean, it was something that was always around. My mother's a musician, and so it was, around the same time I was learning to speak and navigate, things. I was also starting to play violin and piano, and then took up the tuba. So it was always just a big part of my life.
What did your mom play?
Viola.
Was she a professional musician?
She was a semi-professional, maybe. She was in the Boston Philharmonic, but then always had jobs.
Pretty professional.
That was really nice. And my dad also was real enthusiastic. He used to play trombone and sang and stuff like that. So he was enthusiastic about music as well.
At what age did you start listening to music?
I can remember, my first records. I got a Neil Young album, and then some Michael Jackson, and those really were exciting for me. And I suppose as I was playing mostly classical music early on, I just didn't put the two things of what I was listening to with what I was playing. There was a disconnect there. Until I got to high school, I guess, and picked up the guitar. All of my friends were playing guitar too, and there was a need for a bassist. And since coming from the place of playing the tuba, it was sort of a logical connection. And then, as soon as I got it, became proficient pretty quickly on it, and that's all I wanted to do was practice the bass.
That's cool.
So it was just a natural fit for me, and then I could also start to play music that was like what I was enthusiastic about listening to.
Which would be, what was it?
Well, early on it was AC/DC and Led Zeppelin. And then there was a turning point in high school for me where I discovered Chick Corea and King Crimson was a big one at that time. And Herbie Hancock, like the thrust, and got into Earth, Wind and Fire at that time too. So it sort of morphed from the harder rock stuff into a little bit more harmonically adventurous stuff. I was lucky to have a really great private bass teacher named Ed Freeland, he's active. He plays with the Mavericks, and he writes for a lot of publications and stuff too. He's a great teacher and person, and really spent. I would learn stuff quickly and come back. So the lessons were really stimulating, I think, for both of us. And he just kept pushing me and helped with some theory and things like that. And then when I went to college, then, I ended up playing in the jazz ensemble for the whole time I was there. And so that, naturally pushed things a bit further.
Did you go to music school?
I went to Oberlin, which had a music program, but also was a college. So it sort of satisfied both of those things. So I was technically in the college. It's got a philosophy degree there.
Wow.
And then spent a lot of time studying religion and stuff, but always, played. I just never... it was funny. I'd never thought about music as a way to make a living. It was just something that I did, and it was a great hobby.
So you had bands or playing in like the jazz group?
Tons
or things?
of bands and jazz ensemble.
Playing mostly more original music, or were you guys playing covers?
It was all original. Other than in the jazz ensemble, then it was we were playing charts and things like that. But the instructor there was Wendell Logan, who did a lot of his own arranging. So really dense harmonic stuff. It was gorgeous. And then I had the good fortune of being with Donald Byrd for 2 years, who came and directed our big band.
That's cool.
Which was, that was really enlightening. After college, then I got a job at a music bar, attending bar. Mm-hmm. And so I was, knew that I was going to be around music, but still hadn't put it together to play professionally. And then my teacher, Ed Freeland, we reconnected, and he sort of questioned why I was not playing music, and said that there was an opportunity for me to do that. And so he said, basically, quit your job, and things will line up for you. And so I did. And sure enough, he started really referring me a lot for work. And then, and just work led to more work until I was, more busy than I could imagine.
When you say work, like what was that? What kind of gigs were those?
Playing it. There was a club in Cambridge called Riles.
Mm-hmm.
So I was played there an awful lot. Mm-hmm. And then I played weddings on the weekends, different types of events. Just basically anybody that would hire me, I was going to go off and do it. There was a trio with a steel drum player, and we did a lot of calypso music, which was fun and interesting. I started studying then really hard, to the point that I moved back into my mom's house for a year so that I could really dive in. So I was practicing, literally 10 hours a day. At that time, and then took lessons with a guitarist named Bruce Bartlett.
Sure, I studied with Bruce too.
Yeah, so then he's real intense and brilliant, and made me work like crazy.
I credit Bruce as the guy who showed me what I didn't know.
Yeah,
he might. I don't know if I learned it, but he showed me what I needed to learn or currently didn't know, and was like, "Oh shit!"
Yeah, it was an amazing mentor. And we had things. We had lessons where we get together and we go out to Dunkin' Donuts, and he'd get a coffee, and then we'd go play handball for the rest of the lesson, and that was kind of it. Yeah. And then I'd hang with him for that, just because I felt like I was absorbing something. And then he would call me, the next day and say, "Hey man, what are you up to?" And go over to his house and then play standards with him for
over in Chelsea.
Hours. Yeah.
Cool. See, that
was like really great teaching, and he really worked on theory and got me doing a lot of heavy transcriptions and memorizing stuff, and that was huge. As far as that goes, and I still really credit that experience to my ear now. Where all the transcriptions that I did were really helpful. As far as production work and hearing something and knowing what it is.
Did you ever have a moment where you really questioned, like, am I going in the right direction with this, and do I want to be doing this, or was there ever any kind of moment of feeling like
I had a big conversation during that time with my mom, and I told her that I was having real doubts because I felt that I was becoming so self-absorbed and in some ways selfish with music, is that it felt like so much of it was about me and my practice and my learning, and I felt that with my education that maybe I could give, I should give more back to people through that type of work, be it legal or counseling or some sort of other type of work. So I was started to feel a little bit guilty about pursuing music so hard. And she set me straight on that pretty quickly. And she recognized that it was my gift, and it always had been, and that it would be, I guess, not true to myself to not pursue that fully. And that by being a musician, you are giving all of the time, and that people need music. And if you're pursuing it on a high level, you will have a tremendous amount to offer people and change lives in that way. So that sort of set me back on the path, and even with more conviction towards it.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I was very lucky to have her say that, and if the conversation had gone another direction at that time, she said, yeah, she could have easily said, well, you're kind of right, and it's hard to be a musician, and maybe it would be a good idea to do something. That's I mean, I think there's a lot of conversations that have gone that way for people, and so I'm really appreciative for that guidance.
Wow, there must be so many things that you got from your college experience in the studying philosophy and religion and humanities and these things that help make you a better musician.
Yeah, I mean, now we can flash forward to today, but I do feel like I refer back to that training all the time, particularly in production work, where the conversation with artists is regularly, what is your message here? How do you want to convey that message? How do you want your music to feel, to a listener? And it becomes, in some ways a philosophical and spiritual conversation, and
Totally.
I feel like, I have some of the tools to have that conversation, from doing so much work on that for those years.
And just jumping back a little bit, but during that period of when you're kind of getting it together, did it help you that you had these other components, like whether just being a little more self-aware, or having even like a practices, like even a meditation practice, or just ways to keep yourself grounded? Did it help anchor you?
No.
Awesome.
I think that I felt so much pressure and the demands of what music needed, as far as what I felt was catch-up work. That there were all these kids who'd been going to music school, and I needed to play on a level with them, and they'd been completely devoted. So I was trying to do that in a year, and so I did certainly at that time become pretty one-dimensional, and because I was just obsessed and really diving in. And then it was later, as I got sort of reemerged and got out there and moved to New York, that I started branching out a little bit beyond
becoming a person
that.
again.
Yeah, exactly. Somewhat of a person,
relatively functional person.
Yeah.
Through all of this, did you have a moment? Like, I had a real moment where I kind of rejected all my rock records and all of my.
Oh yeah.
Like I remember going and selling all my. Literally cutting my hair, selling my rock records, like within the span of a week.
Yeah, I have huge regrets about doing the same thing. Yeah. It was in college, and that I am a jazz musician, and I'm not going back to that.
This is the real music.
Yeah, this is the real music. And I sold, every single Led Zeppelin record that had been made, all the Police records, all the AC/DC albums, including imports and obscurities and Rolling Stones, and on and on and on. And I remember the guy at their local record store in Oberlin kept looking at me like, these are pretty choice albums. Are you sure about this?
Yeah, right.
And
it's like, you can keep these and buy some new jazz records too.
Yeah, and it felt like it had to be a trade for me. So I regret that that period.
Wow, you can get them back over time.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things about your story that is so unique is moving to New York, of course, and then slowly getting also into recording and having kind of dual path. Like, was that something you even thought of in Boston at this point?
It's something that I did. I had a little 4-track, and so that was part of my practice routine. Was that I would layer things and play on top of it.
So to give yourself
something that I could work on with certain types of changes. So I would play the changes, maybe do some chords on the bass, and then put a drum beat on that, and then improvise or do some things on top of that, or set up a groove of some sort, and then record that. That was just a part of my practice, but it was something that I really enjoyed, but it wasn't again, part of the career path.
How long did it take you between getting the idea of, I think I might move to New York, and actually doing it? Was it relatively quick for you?
It was very quick, yeah, within 2 weeks. Yeah, and it was, I had started coming here a little bit. I had some friends who were living in a building together, and one of them, and so I would come and I would stay at this building, and it was sort of almost like a musician's co-op type of a building, and one of the apartments became available, and one of my friends said, I've been in New York for some time. There are no deals like this. Like, you'd be crazy if you're thinking about coming to New York. Now's the time. Take it. And so I said, yeah, and still had a couple months of gig work related obligations in Boston. So I bought a beater car and drove it back and forth, for a few months. Then I did get a job in New York. It was a watered plants in corporate offices. And did that for a year or two.
While you were also
doing
starting
sessions.
to work in a session?
Yeah, doing sessions. So I had a pager, and I would take my basses and I would plant them in one of the corporate secretary closets, because we were friendly enough, and then if I got a call, then I would drop the bucket and go grab the bass and head off to the studio.
It's like, this is a superhero waiting to happen. This is great. It's Watering Man.
Yeah, it was really funny.
My bass is needed across town.
It sort of felt like that. It was very funny, and then eventually the studio work got so busy that there was no way I could maintain both, and it seemed like the work was, I started getting into some other studios.
And were you just playing? Were you playing bass on sessions at this point? Or
yes, this was all playing bass. Except
this is when this was something that actually. This is the thing that used to happen. They would actually have real sessions, and you'd play with other people.
Yeah, and you'd go to a place, and there'd be multiple writers at that place, and then they'd realize you were there, and I'd jump from one room to the next room, and play on everybody's stuff that they were working on that day. And then one of the places in particular started getting a lot of hype beyond just the commercial world. Tom and Andy, remember those guys?
Of course.
So they started doing work with Laurie Anderson and Lou Reed and David Byrne and Brian Eno, and they were doing a lot of very exciting stuff. Deborah Harry at that time, and just by being the guy that was there so often, I got to play with those people in the productions that they were doing as well there.
And were you doing gigs in addition to this, or was it sessions first?
So I do some singer-songwriter groups, and also a lot of blues artists. So I did the Bleecker Street.
I feel like you moved. What year did you move here?
In 91.
91. Wow, I didn't realize it was so early.
Yeah.
That was a golden era.
It was a very special time. And in fact, a lot of my great friends today really, those friendships started during that time, because we'd see each other every night, crossing paths. We'd borrow different bass amps. You'd play all night. You'd play for 5 hours and have a huge repertoire of material. So, and I was down there, probably 4 nights a week. Doing a variety of stuff.
There was kind of an unlearning process I felt like I had to go through.
Sure.
And when you got to see some of these people and just seeing how elegantly they could play, it was really exciting but intimidating at the same time, and really started to make you think about thinking about tone and sound in a in a different way.
Sure. I mean, all the stuff that I developed and had the capacity to do on the bass became a liability.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
I had to discipline myself to just to realize that. And I would make up games like with a fill, for example.
Yeah.
I would decide that in any song, I get one. Any more than that, then you're blowing it as a bass player. So
That's
and then
cool.
sometimes it was zero, but it was like that sort of started to train me. Now I'll play stuff and do nothing fancy the whole time and be very much at peace with that if it feels good.
Yeah.
But it was a transition for sure, and I'm glad that there were a lot of blues artists that were very patient with me through
Well, that's what I
that
was going to say.
process.
Did you kind of figure that out on your own, or were you kind of... Was there some conversations?
Not about that in particular.
Yeah.
But you can feel it. No one wants someone that's just making a musical joke on the stage or something like that. It's just there's no time for that. It's not what the music's about. And
You also spent a lot of time and continue to play with a really, really, really amazing musician with Hugh Poole. When did you guys start playing together?
so that was about 20 years ago. I was recommended through a drummer friend of mine who was playing with him, and so I went down and heard him play, and it was just
Staggeringly intimidating.
Yeah.
Amazing dude, amazing musician.
Yeah, it was very special, and so we hit it off pretty quick, and started doing trio gigs all the time. And
I felt like when I met you, you guys were working a lot.
Yeah.
There's something so different about seeing somebody. Hearing it is one thing, but then when you get to hear it and see how it physically is happening, which now is much easier to do with YouTube and technology and whatnot, but just that walking in and seeing the aesthetic and actually getting to be around these people and see how they carry themselves in the world, was that inspiring?
For sure. Yeah, it was. The level of humanity in some of these artists that I was able to work with in New York was really touching. I remember at one time I was doing a gig with Bill Sims, and I got to the it was sort of a bar restaurant that we're playing at, and I got there early, and I thought that they were going to give us dinner, and I was I was very broke at the time. And I thought they were going to give us dinner, so I was looking forward to that, and showed up. And they said, "Well, no, actually, you got to pay, half price on this," and it was just too much for me at that time. And so I just sat there and was hungry, and Bill showed up, and he's like, "Hey, man, what's going on?" I was like, "Oh, do you get anything to eat?" And I told him I didn't, and then he just took care of me, and it's like, "Oh man, come on, get some food," and it was very, that was 25 years ago, and I still remember it clear as day.
Yeah.
In fact, I had the opportunity to mention that story to him those years later. And of course, he didn't remember it at all.
Probably
It's
didn't
just,
even.
it's just the kind of a
Wow.
class and generous person that he just is all the time. So it was really, I learned a lot from him and a handful of other really wonderful people.
So you were doing sessions, you were playing gigs, you're playing with all these guys, you're getting all this experience. How did you get in the studio on the other side of doing stuff?
So I guess I continued doing my 4-track recordings in New York, and then as I was working with different singers and songwriters, they would come over, and we weren't intending to make an album at that time, but I had an ability to make a demo of a song or that sort of thing and flesh out some ideas and work
Still on
with
the
them.
cassette 4-track.
Yeah, still on the cassette 4-track.
Wow.
And
You got a lot of mileage out of it.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it was a Tascam. I remember it well. And then I got from being... I guess then I got an 8-track after that. I got a DA88.
Okay.
And a Mackie 16-channel board, and just because there was more work coming like that, it was the best of the best at the time.
Yeah, sure.
And then I happened to be at one of my gigs, and there was a guy there who came up to me and said, "Hey, man, do you ever write music?" And I said, "Yeah, all the time." And so turns out he worked for the NBA, NBA Entertainment, and said, "Well, you want to write a spot for one of our commercials?" And so I said, "Sure." And so it was for Dr. J and somebody else, and so I figured out how to do that really quick, and then worked for them for a few years.
And when you say you figured it out really quick, like, because that's a really specific skill set.
Well, I had a head start in that I'd been in so many.
You played on so many sessions.
Yeah, I'd been in there all the time, and in fact, at Tom and Andy, a lot of times they would come in with an adjective or a feeling that they wanted, and then they really left it to the musicians were doing the writing. And so I was very accustomed to coming up with something quickly and that was memorable and had the feeling that was conveyed by the client.
And were you getting together with friends to do these, or had you been continuing to play guitar? And like at home, did you have guitars? Did you have a keyboard?
I would have guitarists or keyboardists come in. I would do the bass playing and the drum programming at the time. And then I would bring in vocalists, saxophonists, guitarists, keyboardists to do some of that stuff. If it was sort of incidental keyboards, I would cover it. But if it was something that really needed to be featured, I'd bring in one of the players. And I just did those, basically every weekend. Take a couple days and really make it as great as I possibly could. And
that's great. And was this at a time where it was demos, or were they actual?
They were going.
So that's great. So you were in an amazing position, because this way, because a lot of times you're having kind of a demo fee, and then you've got to produce this thing, which now it's different to do it now. It's just you have more tools in one box, where these things were much more.
Yeah.
It was a different way of doing things. So, and you're still not even doing it in a computer at this point. Were you doing it to the ADAT?
Yes, this was still pre-computer.
Wow,
all of those.
How were you delivering
spots.
them on cassettes?
No, on DAT tapes.
Oh yeah, DAT, of course, of course.
Yeah.
Boat anchors.
Yeah. So they'd send 3/4 inch tapes.
Did you have it?
I did. I had which I found at a school where a friend of mine was working, and it was in the closet there, and so grabbed it and looks like it's got to do something. And then,
So did you learn how to lock it up to your ADAT?
No, I hit play at the same time.
You don't see what you press both play buttons and hope for the best.
It was sort of an analog type of sync. But I would just do it like that, and got pretty good at that. So things would line up. Yeah, and that kind of got things going as far as studio, so I could start being able to buy more stuff, because it was a great gig. And then as that developed, then I was able to do higher quality stuff for artists and bands that I was working with. We could do stuff that actually started to sound like records, in my place. And my skill set there was improving. And a lot of times if I was hired to play bass in a band or with a singer-songwriter, then it would sort of naturally morph into me being the producer for the project when they wanted to make a record. Were
you aware of, like, when you say producer, was that like a conscious, like, what a producer even is at that point, or was it just I'm the guy in the band helping someone make their music?
Yeah, it was more of that. I just wanted to have whatever I was involved with be as good as it possibly could. So if I could contribute to that end, I felt that it was sort of, I would do it as long as it was welcome, and I was lucky that often enough it was.
Did you feel like you were developing your recording aesthetic kind of intuitively, or were you thinking about, well, these records I think these records sound great, and how did they make it sound this way, but also starting to be like, well, how do you make this sound like this?
Yeah, I mean, at that time I got really enthusiastic about XTC, so I was listening to those, some of that type of production.
Were you thinking of it more about from the musical content or the sonic content, or was it both?
It was both. It was a lot of it for me was an arrangement types of ideas and what sorts of things were possible, and to try and keep focus on the story, but also make it intriguing for a listener to sort of follow that along. And what you could do musically to make that happen. So I wanted to try and do unexpected things sometimes, or things that were challenging or would push a song in a different direction.
Did you find at times it was easy to get distracted by musical things, by being a musician over the
I think
song?
that was a little bit of a liability sometimes, is that I was such a coming from such a music background and not listening to lyrics as much as I should have. I felt that sometimes that would happen. The music would get in the way of the words, and just by working with some really wonderful singer-songwriters, was able to sort of line that up a lot better, and because the words were so important and well considered for them, they would really take the time to keep their lyric message focused, and if I was pushing production in a way that would interfere with that, they'd let me know about it. And so now I'm much more mindful of
who were some of those early people that really helped you kind of get into that?
I worked with a band we had a band called Blue Leaves, that was with the songwriter Dave De Niro, and he wrote beautiful lyrics, and we would get involved in a lot of the production. He would really help with that. And then this guy Jake Steigers was also really helpful at that time. And then later Julia Darling was really helped shape that for me, I guess. I do prioritize keeping the channels of communication really open through the entire process. And so, if I'm feeling that someone has trepidations about something, or we'll just talk about it right away. Never let something build up. I like to keep it really clean and open. And or if I'm feeling that the band is going in a direction that isn't working for whatever reason, I'll say, for what it's worth, this is a different approach that might help the song better. And trust those ideas and put them out there at least.
Now, is this when you were on Bergen Street at this point now, or?
Yeah, so that was Bergen Street. That's when I started working with Morley and Julia and some of those folks.
You had such a cool space there, like it was in your house,
but
it really felt private. It was really...
Yeah, it was the top floor of a brownstone, and so I had sort of a living room type
and that
of
was
space.
Another really music house, right?
It ended up being, because Joseph Arthur lived on the second floor for a while, and I had a friend who was a music manager. It was sort of a rotating group of people on the second floor. This guy Greg Wiz was a great drummer who lived there for a while, and so it was really around all the time.
That was a real creative laboratory. You had quite a bit of gear at that point in there, and you had switched to the computer at this point.
Yeah, at that point I was in Logic, and I had a vocal booth. There was a walk-in closet in my bedroom, and so I drilled a hole through the wall and ran a couple cables, and it was a really nice and quiet booth for people. And
you had a great aesthetic in that place. It was really comfortable to be in there.
Yeah, and it worked for people, and we did lots of sort of final stuff there. As far as the arrangement, I would go to another studio to record the drums, and then come back there to do any editing and overdubs, and did tons of guitars there and all sorts of stuff. So
if you went to another studio, did you find yourself going to the other studio and engineering, like if you're going to go record drums, or did you find yourself more as a musician producer working with the artist, or were you kind of engineering, producing, if you were outside working with the band?
When I went to another studio at that time, if it was a project that I was producing, I would generally hire a great engineer, and so that they could cover that. I felt like I could do any two things, be it playing, producing, or engineering. I can do two of those things, pretty at the same time, but all three is a little bit much.
You're diluting yourself too much.
Yeah, and they all require different types of focuses and stuff. So I felt like, and then also I was learning stuff as an engineer. I hadn't come up through audio engineering school either, and so by being able to hire some really great engineers, I learned from them. We talk about aesthetics, and we get in there and learned how a console is routed, and what compressors do, and different types of reverbs and stuff like that. 'Cause it was conversations that we'd have.
Did you spend a lot of time working on tape at that time and moving things over to the computer? It was kind of right on the cusp of all of that.
Yeah, I did a lot of tape, and then also recording to tape, and then transferring to computer. Once we had a take that we liked, or a couple takes, and then we could do the editing in the computer. So there wasn't a whole lot of tape splicing at that point, because things were migrating into the computer, but still recorded to tape. Whenever that was possible, it was still preferred.
How would you describe to someone, like when someone calls you up to work on a project? I would imagine it's different for different projects, but do you feel yourself kind of front-loading things sometimes pre-production wise, or is it just depend?
I encourage it, whenever possible. I think that the pre-production is really, really helpful for people, and that you can you end up avoiding a lot of mistakes. And actually, you may spend a few more days doing pre-production, but what you gain from it later in the process is huge. You really know your tempos and your keys, and know that the arrangement is working, and know that the elements that you're going to add later to it, will work, because you've recorded it, lived with it. You have some sort of a demo that you're working with.
Yeah.
And and in projects where you don't take the time to do that, I've been in enough situations now where the artist then realizes that it's in the wrong key, or it was the drummer played it way too fast, or whatever, and something got lost. And at that point, you either have something that you're not happy with, or you have to spend a ton of money to re-record it and do it that way.
It could have been headed off at the pass.
Yeah, I always hold the artist as really the boss, and I make suggestions. It's kind of like being a doctor. It's like, I'm not going to tell you that you have to eat your vegetables. I mean, I will encourage you to eat your vegetables. And, and if it doesn't happen, then that's kind of, that's on you, or there may be a reason that they're allergic to vegetables. It's happened a number of times. Is that, a song that would benefit from a bridge. If there was just too much back and forth between verse, chorus, and then I felt like there was a message that was waiting to be had there, that sort of, is a transitional thing, or sums up the whole of the song. It's like a lot of times the bridge, with some songwriters, it gets overlooked, and can be, a real helpful vehicle. So that comes up. Or if there's a verse that isn't contributing to the story and the song is feeling long, it's like, we'll talk about maybe taking that out, and the conversation will be, what are we losing by taking that out? Is the message being diminished or compromised? Because
I know you've done a lot of work with both solo artists and with bands. Do you work differently in those situations? Or?
Yes, because a band it tends to be more of a democracy, and there's a group of people who are all weighing in on something. Yeah. So, and then there's a lot of voices to hear, and then there's also different history and dynamics within the band itself that sort of weigh in on that process. And just with working with a solo artist, it's more of a direct person-to-person conversation about where a project is headed and that sort of thing. So it's I guess the number of people who are having the conversation is the big difference.
Do you paint a picture of what the whole entire process is going to feel like at the beginning? I feel like some of the mistakes I know that I've made was not communicating clearly enough what to expect at this point, or when you get to mixing, if we didn't deal with something earlier and now it wants to be dealt with, but it's something that it can be adjusted plus or minus a few degrees, but it can't fundamentally be changed, or now we're going to go to mastering, or the revelation of, I thought it was only going to take this much resources financially to make the record, but
we'll make an itinerary and a formal budget, prior to any of those projects. So we know sort of these are going to be the days when we'll be doing our pre-production. These are the days when we're doing the basics. These are our overdub days. These are vocal days. And this is how much time you're going to need for mixing, and then this is what the mastering will be. So we have there are no surprises really in that way. And
And do you try to present people with a couple of different options of like,
yeah, I'll often do three budget scenarios, and then talk about what the benefits or the compromises are with each one. I can say that projects usually benefit from more time. You get a chance, the opportunity, say in basics, to change out drum sounds or change guitar amps and do some things like that might really suit a song better versus if you're trying to do everything in 2 days, you kind of got to work with whatever's set up at that time. You don't have the luxury of swapping stuff out, and so being able to experiment around the projects will benefit from that. When it's a possibility, but then you also have to respect limitations and that sometimes the budget just doesn't allow for that, and so you deal with it.
Yeah, exactly. And do you advise people to maybe come in, cut some basics, and then maybe even take it away and do some overdubbing away, especially if it's budget limited?
Yeah, that happens a lot, and we really try and accommodate that. In terms of what someone will receive in terms of the files, and then our flexibility and stuff. We don't make things difficult in that capacity because that's just how people are working.
Because someone wants to really try to craft some guitar parts and spend some time.
Yeah, and people can do amazing things in the comfort of their own homes. And sometimes a singer would be more comfortable singing in their living room than they would be in a studio necessarily. And if they can get great results, then by all means.
When they're doing that, do you have times when they're sharing what they're doing to kind of check back in with you to be like, am I okay? Have I gone too far? Help me.
Yeah.
This is a really high functioning recording studio with incredible audio integrity. But to someone who doesn't know what these things are, it's actually very well done and transparent in terms of, because you have lots of instruments, you have lots of things that are around that you wouldn't know that this microphone is a blah blah blah, or this speaker is a this or that, because you're like, oh cool, there's a Fender Rhodes, or there's a pump organ, and I feel like this physical size of the studio is kind of perfect for that, because it really feels like, in a way, it's like the most idyllic rehearsal space.
Yeah, some of my favorite memories from recording here is when an artist says, "Oh, are we recording already?" And not having any awareness that there's that there are microphones set and that there's that we've already gotten sounds and all that sort of stuff. Like if the engineer and the equipment can stay really transparent, I think that lends itself towards better music making. It takes people aren't self-conscious about being in the studio. They're just hanging out in a room with a group of friends and hearing sounds that they enjoy. That's when you're going to get something magical.
I think it's probably very inspiring for those people who come here and have very limited contact with some of because you really do have some really unique things here that that it breeds creativity. It inspires people because it's like, wow, I've never seen a vintage Tweed Deluxe, or I've never gotten to play through one. What's that like?
Yeah.
And
there it is.
And maybe it's something to explore, and maybe just the idea that it's not all packed away and all. It's literally, well, it's 4 feet away. Plug it in. Let's see. Throw a mic on it.
That is how it works. All the time here is that someone will say, "Oh, there is a Rickenbacker over there. Let me."
I've never really played one,
but I like the sound, and it might really work for this tune. Do you mind if I plug that in? And of course, that's why it's here.
Yeah, that's
so those sorts of inspirations are really fun, and stuff that we did something for the first time last week that was plugging an omnichord into a Leslie, with a gorgeous sound, and they're both been here, and we just put them together.
We were speaking about this a little bit earlier. It's like kind of building systems in ways to kind of make it easier to be more creative and to in terms of non-musical things that you've kind of implemented that actually allow you to be more creative. Like what is that like when you think about it?
A lot of that has to do with we've some templates. This may not exactly answer, but I think it's important, is that the way the patch bay is designed and the templates that we use for Pro Tools is that we can create a new session, and very quickly things are routed where they're supposed to go, and it doesn't require a lot of analytical or technical thought. I've preamps that I like to use with certain microphones on certain sources, and I can set those pretty quickly to where I think that they're going to function well. And if we can get sounds quickly, it inspires artists. I think there's nothing worse than listening to a snare drum for 4 hours and just to see a band fall apart and everyone loses steam and inspiration.
Yeah, we got a great snare drum sound, but the performance is uninspired.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you kind of, because my impression, I see you as a smart, pragmatic person. Like, as the technology developed in the computer, were you like, now, like, if you kind of, do you spend a lot of time thinking about how you can kind of basically hack your system, the way your processes to make yourself be more creative or more powerful in those moments, to be able to get more done?
Yeah, I mean, we use the same type of note-taking system and stuff like that. So for
coincidental, or did you?
No, so it's something that just sort of I've developed over many years of doing this, but it's for in particular for mix recalls, or for like if we're recording a vocal, we'll write down what the vocal chain is specifically, what the levels are, and that'll be in the comment section of Pro Tools. So we'll say, okay, this is the U67 into the 1066 and CL1B, and what all the settings are for that. And that's just text entered into the notes.
Yep.
So that if someone comes in a night and they need to fix a verse, Jake can open up the session, and if I recorded it, he can open it up and he'll see the note that says, oh, this is what the signal flow was, and have it set up, and right away, without having to spend an hour trying to match sounds, you can get back to where you left off. So that helps workflow quite a lot. And we do the same thing with the mixing. That we take on every mix real detailed notes about what all the outboard gear is doing. Then detailed notes takes all of 5 minutes. But when we call a mix up again for a recall, and again 5 minutes of just putting the knobs back where they go, and we are really back to where we left off.
That's great.
It's wonderful. So
it sounds like you guys are kind of lucky. You're very lucky you found one another, because that's so much. It's mindset. It's like a studio needs to have kind of a mindset of like, what are our values? It's and then you overlap with tastes and all of these things. You become a deeper team. But that's one of the things that I find. And in speaking, I guess you should go around and see different studios and how they're organized. It's like being able to make the place functional and creative. Like sometimes, like it's the right amount of vibe with the right amount of functionality. Yeah, and it's tricky to strike that balance and to realize how there's freedom in these systems. Yeah,
the systems are important. Like, and another thing that we do that's a little bit different from other studios I've experienced is, we do a good amount of advance work prior to any session, so we know, what the instruments are that are coming in, and if there are any specific amps that people want pulled, and the drum kit that they want to use, and down to the cymbals. We'll have that stuff in place, and microphones in place. So at the point when someone walks into the studio, they can really sit down. They have a spot. The amp that they requested is plugged in, and maybe even a couple other options that they might want to consider for the project. We'll have stuff pulled and in place. And
you're managing that basically all online? Are you using like project management software?
No, it's just email. Yeah, and then we have a calendar that we use for the for all the sessions. So in iCal, we will then take critical notes for the session, and we'll just paste those into it, so that
what was accomplished, what needs to be done.
what the goal is for the day. We want to record 6 songs. We want this drum kit. We want this bass amplifier. Make sure that this guitar has new strings on it, or whatever it is, and the piano needs to be tuned. Any of those types of advanced notes appear in the comment section of iCal, and so
There's not one person walking around with all the information in
Yeah,
their head. That's great.
Yeah, it's really important, and it makes everybody's life easier and less a lot less chaos.
And how do you guys manage it? Because there's a lot of instruments that need to be maintained, and that's always that I would always think about this just with a guitar store. It's like you want to sell me a guitar for however much, and I can't even decide if it's a good guitar because it's basically you hung it on the wall and left it for dead, or do you guys? How do you guys? Because there's a lot of things that need maintenance here that need to be maintained.
Just really stay on top of it, so that as soon as something starts crackling or humming or something that's not right, it'll go off to the shop within a day.
That's great.
In most cases. So there's really nothing here that's not working, because that's also, as an artist, kind of annoying to say, hey man, can I use that amplifier? And you say, oh well, that one doesn't work, and how about that guitar? The pickup on that one, that doesn't. I
feel like I've never been in a studio where the Mellotron actually was working. It was sitting in the corner looking. You're like, is that what? Is that a? That's one of the Mellotron things.
It's just not a good feeling to
can we turn it on?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
All the time that happens, and I just assume not have it there taking up space and tempting someone. Yeah,
it's a quintessential piece of gear that never seems to be working.
Yes,
looks cool.
Yeah, I guess, and it all has to do with keeping people inspired, and it has to do with the client's comfort.
That's great.
It's just out of respect for the music and the people who are making it. That's a big driving force behind all of those types of things. Another thing that one last thing that we do that is really helpful is that for say there's a song that's in progress. Each time we open up that song in Pro Tools, we save it as the next version. So the song title would be. My song is called This Table is Blue. And so it would be 01, This Table is Blue. Next time we open up the song, 02, This Table is Blue. And then each of those sessions has a corresponding rough mix that the artist gets a chance to live with. So, by the time you're done with a song and you're at R13 and it's session 13, My Table is Blue, that if the artist says, there was a vocal treatment that we had on R4, do you remember what that was or how we got that? And you can just open up the session and it's right there.
That's killer.
Like immediately, go back and it lines up, and it's really empowering for artists and the process.
That's fantastic.
There's no reason not to do that, and it's really helpful.
That's really great. And how do people find out more about what you're doing and what the studio's doing?
So they can find stuff online. So it's grandstreetrecording.com.
Mm-hmm.
Or we have a Facebook account and Instagram and Twitter and all that sort of stuff. We maintain that. And so there's a lot of information and videos and photos and gear lists and all that sort of stuff is available there. And we also pick up the phone when people call. So.
But unless you're recording.
Right. Someone else will pick up the phone.
Someone leave a message.
Yeah.
That's great. Ken, thank you so much for sitting down, and you've really created an amazing space here, and people should definitely come check it out in Brooklyn.
Well, thank you very much. It's nice having you here.
Thank you for listening to the Loud Noise Podcast. I love to hear your feedback and want to make the show the best it can be. Please leave me a comment or tweet me at Steve Walsh Music on Twitter. If you enjoyed this podcast, please take a couple minutes and leave me a review on iTunes. It helps get the word out about the show, plus I'd really appreciate it. You can subscribe to Loud Noise and you'll receive new episodes with new conversations full of tips, time savers, and advice to take your music to the next level. So dig in, get out there, and make great music. Until we meet again further on up the road, cheers.